Chapter 13. The Poet. 8 sons are useful when you're running a farm. The grain fields that Boaz had passed down to them required the skill and muscular hard work of the older boys, so the runt of the litter was relegated to watching the sheep. Young David probably didn't mind much, since the peace and quiet of the outdoors inspired his creativity. He was a sensitive lad who loved music. For hours he would pick out notes on an old harp that he packed around with him as he kept a watchful eye on the flock. And he had a way with words, weaving them together, expressing ideas that matched in poetic couplets. When he wasn't plucking his harp, he would work with a sling and stone. Doubtless he'd heard of the skills of his cousins from the tribe of Benjamin, and he determined to share that proficiency. Many a rabbit became barbecued supper on his lonely vigils up on the hills around Bethlehem. One day he heard the familiar family whistle, summoning him home. On arriving at the homestead in town, he was surprised to find the place full of strangers. He pushed his way in. "About time, too," muttered one of his big brothers. All 7 of them were there, and next to Jesse, his father, stood a stranger, an old man that David had never seen before. As the lad approached, the old man said, "Ah, this is the one." He called the lad to his side and then produced a horn from which he removed the plug and poured the oily contents over David's head. "Young man, you will be the next king of Israel." And with that they all sat down to eat. David found out later that the old man was a prophet named Samuel. Everyone seemed terrified of him. To imagine that such an anointing would improve David's place in the family pecking order would be a mistake. Nothing changed. He was still the youngest, still required to watch the flock. But from then on, something imperceptibly changed in David's heart. He felt a fresh confidence, a sense of anticipation, a consciousness of the closeness of God. It was as though the Spirit of God had become his closest companion. Music and poetry came to him so vividly that he began to write it down. Sitting on a slope one lonely evening, watching his flock graze on the pasture that spread down to a stream, a confidence stole into his heart. "The Lord is my shepherd, so I shall never need a thing." Perhaps a growl disturbed his concentration. Then suddenly all was pandemonium. The sheep were scattering, running for their lives, pursued by a lion, running at full stretch, seeking to pick off a straggler. Without a second thought, David launched himself in pursuit of the lion. When he got close enough, he landed a direct hit on its flank with a well-slung rock. The animal roared in fury and turned towards David, growling and snarling as it approached. Far from wanting to run, the lad was furious that this brute would dare to threaten his sheep. He advanced on the beast, step for step, holding his shepherd's staff out in front of him. The animal crouched, then sprang, but David was ready. The staff took the brunt of the assault, and as David sprawled to the ground with the lion on top of him, he grabbed it by its mane and slit its throat with his shepherd's knife. When he'd stopped panting, he pushed the dead beast off and cleaned the knife on its fur. Then he called in his sheep, quietening them by his voice and comforting them with his presence. Some weeks later, there was a similar attack, only this time it was a bear who suffered the same fate. David learned that confidence in the protection of God had all but banished his fears, so he wrote some more. "He who lives in the protection of the Most High, who rests in the shade of the Mighty One, will call the Lord my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust." Soon he was writing new material almost every day, inspired by everything he saw and experienced. When the dry season turned the land to dust, he observed a deer lying in the shade of a shrub by a dried-up stream bed. "I know how that feels," he thought. "As a deer gasps for water, so my soul longs for you, God. My soul thirsts for you. My body pines for you, as in a parched land with no water." It's doubtful that he had aspirations to be a professional musician, but if he had, then he would have been overjoyed when he received a summons from the royal court to be a musician to soothe the king's jangled nerves. This was but a half-time position, so he divided his days between caring for his sheep and being a harpist in the service of King Saul. It was but a 10-mile jog between Bethlehem and Gibeah, where the king made his home. On the way he had to skirt the fortress town of Jerusalem, still stubbornly occupied by Jebusites. What a great city could be built up there! Perhaps one day